Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, as we hit record, there was immediately a loud blast from a train horn audible, like clearly audible on the audio. And I mean, we are nothing if not consistent. I will say that our sonic experience remains extremely consistent.
I like the sonic experience of the Buckeye Weekly Podcast because you never know exactly what will show up. I promise. I can't promise. I'm going to say I promise there will be no mowing during the show, but I cannot actually promise that, and I shouldn't have even brought it up. And let's just ignore anything that I said in relation to that. I will promise no, helicopters flying overhead. I'll try to do that. I personally will not be flying a helicopter during the show.
Well, it's Tuesday morning, so I think we're probably safe from the Wednesday tornado siren test, probably, unless we go very long or someone forgets what day it is. But, again, stranger things have happened. Anything short of like a pterodactyl screeching past one of our windows, I think is very much in play anytime we record one of these shows.
Well, that would be that's the one that has not been checked off the box, but there is still time. One day, perhaps, if the show goes long enough or travels back in time, we'll take care of that one. Tom, today's show is just a series of topics. We've covered some of the recruiting stuff that's going on in previous shows and also on, things like that. So I thought let's discuss some Ohio State stuff, some Big Ten stuff, and just, tackle some topics here. And the first topic that I have for you is, where is Marvin Harrison going to rank among Ohio State receivers when he's done? And I say when he's done, after his senior year, of course, in 2024, either this year or next year. Where do you think he is going to rank among the Ohio State receiver lineage?
So we're just talking purely, soft factors. We're not talking about in terms of yardage or in terms of receptions. We're talking purely about just how his standing in the Ohio State receiver community, right?
Yes.
Okay. Who is at the top of the list right now to you in that realm?
And the thing is, David Boston was there because I was in college at the same time. And so he went above Chris Carter for me. And so that's who I had. I honestly, as I was thinking about this question, I don't even know if I have a top one at this point anymore, because we have seen the shift of Ohio State offense become so great and so pass heavy that, I think there are guys, Terry Glenn, David Boston, Chris Carter, Joey Galloway, Santonio Holmes. You put any of those guys in this offense, I think they can do what Marvin Harrison does. So that clouds everything for me.
Yeah, and you worry about recency bias a little bit, and the numbers are so spectacular recently that I think that only sort of exacerbates that issue. I think all the guys you mentioned are possibilities. I think you could put Garrett Wilson in that group. I think, frankly, you could have Jackson Smith-Njigba somewhere in the top 5 or so, and he basically didn't play his last season. And that, I don't think that needs to be disqualifying, because Terry Glenn basically played one season at Ohio State, more or less. He was really an impact player for one season at Ohio State. So I think, if Jackson Smith-Njigba played a full last season, and even if he, I'm going to air quotes, only had 1,100 yards or something like that, I think he's maybe at the top of the list, just based on that that 2021 season, his second season. I think he might be at or near the top of the list. And given that, I think there's a real possibility, if Marvin Harrison has a 1,200, 1,500 yard type season, the kind of season that you're sort of viewing as at least a possibility, I think he could be in that, very much at or near the top of that list. And, you got to have a quarterback that you trust to be able to get you there. You got to have an offensive line that can protect to get you there. So will he get there? I don't know. We'll see. But I think if he's in that 1,200 yard range, 1,500 yard range, And especially if he has some, maybe a few more of those really iconic plays or iconic touchdowns, I think he ends up right at or near the top of that list. Because he's certainly, if you're going to go by objective factors, who's the highest drafted Ohio State wide receiver in history? Has anyone been higher than top 5 as a wide receiver? I don't remember one off the top of my head. So he might be the top by that objective measure too.
Yeah, because you've had some top 10 guys. Terry Glenn was a top 10 guy. David Boston, Joey Galloway were all like the 8, 9 range. Garrett Wilson, he was like 9 or 10 as well. I recently, this spring on a podcast, Brian Hartline said that Marvin Harrison was the best receiver he's ever coached. So, like, if we're going to take his word for it, if you want to use him as a source, I think then you put, that's everybody else that he has coached that would be in this discussion. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith-Njigba, they have to be a step below Marvin Harrison. And so now you're comparing Marvin Harrison to everybody who was in the argument before. And basically, I think maybe that's Chris Carter, David Boston, and I know somebody's going to throw in Paul, what's his name, back in the 60s, Paul Warfield, and it's like, yes, but he was a running back at Ohio State. So let's not get into this. But he's a Hall of Famer. I understand NFL Hall of Famer. That's not what we're talking about. He probably had like 8 career catches at Ohio State. But like Terry, and Terry Glenn is another guy who had 64 catches in 1995 and 1,400 yards receiving. What would he do with 95 catches? Like what kind of numbers are we talking about? Because he averaged 22 yards a catch in 1995. Not that he would today, because again, offenses are a little bit different. You're throwing more short passes to move the chains instead of going deep all the time and big passes like that. But I don't know who I have at the top. That's why I asked you. And I guess because I don't know, then that means there is room for somebody to take that spot. And if I'm going to put money on it, I'm not going to bet against Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I am right now, that there isn't a clear-cut number one. If Jackson Smith-Njigba put up another season in 2022 like he did in 2021, I think he's at the top of the heap and he's pretty tough to beat. But because he didn't, I think there is a vacancy at the top of the heap there for Ohio State. And you know what they say, Tony, nature abhors a vacuum, so I think that might get filled this fall. Tony, Paul Warfield career stats. We're going to play a little game. We're going to say Paul Warfield career stats versus C.J. Stroud passing stats in the 2022 Rose Bowl. Okay? More completed catches / completed passes. Paul Warfield in his career versus C.J. Stroud in the 2022 Rose Bowl.
Oh, I think C.J. Stroud had many more completions than Paul Warfield had catches.
You are incorrect. Paul Warfield, 39 career catches. C.J. Stroud, 37 career completed passes in the 2022 Rose Bowl. Tony, yardage. Receiving yardage for Paul Warfield career versus C.J. Stroud in the 2022 Rose Bowl.
Well, that's a good one. I'm going to say, so we're basically saying yards per catch versus yards per completion here. And I'm going to, again, side with C.J. Stroud. I think it's kind of close, though.
It is kind of close. C.J. Stroud, 573 yards. Paul Warfield, 525 yards for his career. So C.J. Stroud has beaten him there. Finally, Tony, the tiebreaker. You're 1-1. Let's find out if you're a winner or a loser. Touchdowns. Career touchdowns for Paul Warfield through the air at Ohio State versus touchdowns through the air for C.J. Stroud in the 2022 Rose Bowl.
And did he have 6 touchdown passes in that game? Or 5?
He did have six touchdown passes.
Should have been 7, but Jackson Smith-Njigba tripped over his own feet and fumbled the ball, that sort of thing. I will say, I'm going to say it's 6-5, C.J. Stroud.
Oh, Tony, you lose. It's 6-6. It's a push. So 1-1. They both finished 500. You're a loser, but that's okay. That's I just felt like that was a good, interesting way to sort of frame that. Just yes, that is the future NFL Hall of Famer Paul Warfield. His entire career at Ohio State, almost as good as C.J. Stroud's 2022 Rose Bowl. Has the game changed, Tony? I don't know. Hard to say.
I would have had a push if I just would have said CJ Stroud rather than giving you a score. You know, if I say CJ Stroud, you're like, oh, actually nobody. But the fact that I gave you a score really, really enforced the fact that I got that one wrong. So
I agree that you would have tried to argue that you weren't wrong, but
fair. That is fair.
Yeah, so I think we're in agreement there that this is very much within the realm of possibility that Marvin Harrison ends up at the top of that heap this year. And then the real fun question is how long does he stay there? Because there's some talented guys coming behind him as well.
That is, boy, and I'm writing about Carnell Tate for Tuesday, and so let's go ahead and put a whole bunch of pressure on him to step in and become the next Marvin Harrison. You heard it here first. And then, the next Carnell Tate, of course, Jeremiah Smith, the next Jeremiah Smith, as we know, Chris Henry Jr., so on and so forth. Good luck living up to all of those expectations to each of you.
I can't wait to see Brian Hartline and have him yell at both of us about setting unrealistic. It's going to be great. I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic.
I know.
Tony said it, not me.
And this is a guy who hates expectations, like putting expectations on players and things like that. And we've already moved on to the class of 2026 talking about a guy. If he hasn't lived up to the hype by 2028, what are you doing here? I mean, honestly.
Just got to patiently wait for Chris Henry III any day now.
All right, Tom. Next topic. In honor of University of Kentucky tight ends coach Vince Marrow subtweeting Demarion Witten for committing to Ohio State, and I will read that tweet for you now. As you know,
make sure you spell any relevant words.
Yeah, well, so Demarion Witten, the tight end, committed to Ohio State recently. He was down to Kentucky and Ohio State, and I think people at Kentucky thought they had a really good chance. And so shortly after Demarion Witten commits, Vince Marrow tweets, and who knows why he tweeted this. I got the target I wanted. This is SEC ball, and we got A&D, SEC grown man, go big blue. And clearly, this is a subtweet about Demarion Witten committing to Ohio State. We've seen it before. But my question for you, Tom, is if you were a former or even current Ohio State coach, head coach, assistant coach, and you subtweeted a recruit for choosing another school, which coach would you be? Who would be the recruit? And what would you tweet?
First of all, before we move on to that, we do need to provide the relevant context to the Vince Marrow tweet, which was the follow-up tweet. And another thing, I'm not mad. Please don't put in the newspaper that I got mad. Very important information there. I feel like we really have to provide the whole context of the situation before we move on. All right. So, to me, I saw this. You sent this question over, and I thought, oh, there's only one answer to this. Who do you always want to tweet as? Which former Ohio State assistant or head coach would you want to tweet as?
Mike Vrabel?
No, come on, Tony. It's Kerry Combs. Tony, come on.
Just a bunch of hashtags. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Very long hashtags. Do you remember when Kerry Combs and Urban Meyer drove up to go see Donovan Peoples-Jones in a snowstorm? And then Donovan Peoples-Jones chose Michigan? Tony, tell me you wouldn't love hashtag, if we drive to see you in a snowstorm, you owe us a commitment, hashtag, have fun with John O'Corn. I mean, come on, like there's no other answer to this. Move on. Next question.
No, it's so funny because as I was running some errands this morning, I immediately came back to, yes, talk about Kerry Combs and just the hashtags, just constant hashtags. That's a very good one. And I could definitely see that if he was like that. He is not. One of the ones I was thinking of when Ohio State was in on Taj Boyd in the 2009 class. I mean, it was down to Ohio State and Clemson, and then he commits to Clemson, and then Nick Siciliano, who wasn't quite the quarterback's coach at that time, but remember, Nick Siciliano and his wife just had like quadruplets, and so the tweet would have been from Nick Siciliano, good, I've got enough babies in my life.
That is tremendous. I had forgotten that Nick Siciliano had a litter of kids back then. That's a good one as well. I was thinking this was going to be a Jim Tressel one that ended with hashtag quiet time, but no, that's a good one as well. Yeah, it's good to act like a grown up on Twitter, and you don't have to post everything you think on Twitter. That's a thing that most people have learned over the years. It's amazing, Tony. how many of these questionable choices happen, later in the evening? It's a funny thing how you don't see a lot of those at 10 in the morning, but at 10 at night, things get a little loose. It's interesting. I wonder what the correlation could be. Probably nothing.
Was it Jim Tressel that said nothing good happens on Twitter after 10 p.m.?
Yes, that is exactly what he said. And yes, there's a reason his tweets come out at 6 in the morning and not 10:30 at night. Yes.
A couple of other topics for us, Tom, and I think there's probably several names here, but we'll just take it as we go. Which unsung Buckeye should people be ready to sing about this year?
Let's see. Is Mitchell Melton unsung? Because he really hasn't done anything on the field, and I think that role could be one where he's very productive this year. So I think that's an option. I think Ty Hamilton, for as productive as Ty Hamilton has been, I feel like Ty Hamilton just kind of gets lost in the Mike Hall and Tyleik Williams and JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Caden Curry, and it's like, oh yeah, and also Ty Hamilton. And he's so much like Devon Hamilton in that he's so productive, and he's just, no one ever talks about him. If you did a Sporkle quiz on Ohio State defensive lineman, Ty Hamilton would be about the 7th or 6th guy you thought of. But he's very effective at what he does. He has been a very solid player for them for years now, and I think at some point people are going to figure it out, probably.
I went with some kind of established starters because of, I guess there has been singing about this guy, Jack Sawyer, but they're mostly diss tracks that he's had to deal with on Twitter. So I think
a lot of people tweeting about Jack Sawyer at 10 p.m. and too.
I think moving him away from the Jack and just letting him be a defensive end, I think that is going to be very good for him. Also, the defensive tackles, Ty Hamilton being one of them, Mike Hall being another, will help him be able to get after the passer. So I'm expecting bigger things for him than the 4.5 sacks that he had last year. And even if it's the same 4.5 sacks, the disruption level I expect to go up. Another one, and I think Julian Fleming, there are only so many footballs, and Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka are going to command a lot of those. But when Julian Fleming was at his healthiest last year, he scored 6 touchdowns in the first 5 games he played, and he was a viable receiving threat for the Buckeyes. I won't be shocked at all if he is one of 3 receivers with double-digit touchdown catches this year. There's just, you're going to have to distribute them. Like, the opportunities would be there for him. I think he is a 1,000-yard receiver just about anywhere else that throws the ball. Here at Ohio State, just the opportunities will be difficult. Another one that, you look through all of the preseason magazines are out, and the preseason all Big Ten teams are out. You never see Steel Chambers' name mentioned in any of the top 2 teams. And this is a guy who plays a position that produces in Jim Knowles' defense. So I think he's another one he's probably not going to put up 100 tackles because other people, Tommy Eichenberg is getting a lot of tackles, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of these, 10, 12 tackle for loss types of seasons where he's making some impact. And yes, I know CJ Hicks. Everybody wants CJ Hicks to play. He will play, but I'm just saying, don't forget about Steel Chambers in all of this.
I think it's kind of funny that you could look at Steel Chambers, who started all of last year, and kind of view him as a little bit unsung, whereas CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles, neither of whom have started a game yet. CJ Hicks hasn't played a snap on defense. And because there's been so much talk about them, and I will raise my hand and say we're guilty of that, and you in the audience should be raising your hands and saying you're guilty of that because you're asking us to talk about these guys a lot, so we end up talking about these guys a lot, and the coaches are talking about these guys a lot too. But it feels like CJ Hicks is almost less unsung than Steel Chambers in some ways, because Steel Chambers doesn't get the accolades that Tommy Eichenberg gets. He doesn't get the online attention that CJ Hicks gets. It's just he just kind of, but he's just been really, really good for them, and I think he's going to be with another year away from being a running back, another year in the defense, another year at the position. All of that to me means potentially a very good year for Steel Chambers, and a very good year for Steel Chambers, Tony, means more interview opportunities with Steel Chambers, which I mean, he is. There are some good interviews on this year's team, but man, I think Steel Chambers might be my favorite just because of I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm sure it's going to be fun.
Yeah, and he is always entertaining to talk to. I saw him on Twitter at a football camp, hosting or being part of it as one of the counselors, and he was throwing footballs to his campers, and said if we catch out every football, we're not going to have a punishment, but somebody dropped one, so they had to do a punishment. And he's like, "What do you guys want to do? Push-ups or up downs?" And everybody's saying, "Let's just do up downs." He's like, "No, we're running," and he takes off running, and the campers had to then go follow him. So that's Steel Chambers. Impossible not to like him. Tom, if Ryan Day could have one of these guys be the unsung hero, that sort of thing, who do you think you would choose? And is the answer Kyle McCord at this point, or like of the guys we've mentioned, maybe who would Ryan Day choose?
Yeah, boy, I think Ryan Day's picking an offensive lineman or a quarterback, one or the other. I think if it's Ryan Day, he's picking Josh Fryer as his unsung hero, or Josh Simmons or Zen Mihalski or Tager Shabola or whoever ends up playing right tackle, or Jacob James or Carson Hinsman or whoever ends up playing center. I think that's, when you hear Ryan Day talk about the areas of concern or the areas where he's not totally set yet, that's, I'm sure he's going to take one of those spots. But if the guys we've talked about, let's say, Jack Sawyer, I think he, knowing what a disruptive pass rush can do, I think if, as a quarterback, how disruptive a really effective pass rush is and how much that makes the rest of the defense better. So, if he could magically, just wave his hand and Jack Sawyer has 15 sacks this year, I think he would probably take that real quick.
I would be interested in his answer on the offensive line, because while he feels best about Josh Fryer, you wonder if the concern that is just the existence of left tackle, like how much does that weigh more than his concern at center? Because I'm sure he feels better about Josh Fryer than he does about Carson Hinsman, but does he feel better about Josh Fryer at left tackle than he does Carson Hinsman at center? That sort of thing. And what kind of concerns does he have? How much has Josh Simmons alleviated some concerns, or just the constant motion and the fact that there is still so much more to be done there, that has to be done there. And while you think you have all of the unknowns, like, yeah, you may know all of the numbers, but you don't know how the math is going to work out. And fall camp is going to be interesting, and we can say fun. I don't know that he would say fun, and as they're going through it.
I don't think any player would ever say fun. I don't know if the coaches ever think that's fun. It's always kind of a grind. How often do we hear guys talk about it being, like Groundhog Day? And it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fascinating to watch. It's going to be fascinating to cover. But I don't know if fun is the word that anyone would use.
Well, I remember every year Urban Meyer would have a saying or a word, and one year it was the chase. The next year was have fun. So.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. Wasn't one year like the Land of the Wolves or something? And it was like, what? What?
The chase was 2 years in a row.
Yeah, the chase was 15 and 16, right? And then the Land of the Wolves, I think, was 17. And that was the year that everyone was so confused. Like, what does that mean that they forgot to show up and play the Iowa game? So, it can happen. It happens to anyone. But, yeah.
Boy, Tom, too soon. Thank you for bringing the show way down. In order to try to lift the show up just a little, let's talk about the Big Ten. And specifically, what non-Buckeye Big Ten, or what non-Buckeye player in the Big Ten are you most looking forward to watching this year? I don't want to say it's a marquee season in the Big Ten for big names, because it's certainly not, but what names are you looking forward to?
I think the top of my list is probably Drew Aller at Penn State, because it feels like Penn State has been, they kind of went through their own version of like Aldi brand JT Barrett for 3 years. And like it was fine. They won a bunch of football games, but you kind of felt like, okay, this is never, you're going to be good to a certain point and not get past that. And I mean, let's be clear. Sean Clifford won the Rose Bowl. Sean Clifford has had a very, very good career, but Sean Clifford was never going to lead them to the college football playoff, potential national championship game. He is a guy who is what he is, and he is what he is. Drew Aller, I don't think it happens this year. I think they're going to be better this year. I think they're going to have a higher ceiling this year. Maybe they make the playoff. I think, they still have to play Michigan, they still have to play Ohio State, but that I think he is the player I'm most intrigued to see. Okay, is this a Dwayne Haskins season? Is this a Justin Fields season? Is this a CJ Stroud season? Or is this just, name brand JT Barrett and not, and not store brand JT Barrett?
If everything goes well for Penn State, he could be the next Anthony Morelli.
Do they still use the school buses? If they don't use the school buses, you can't be Anthony Morelli. I'm sorry. If you don't get off the school bus and yell, you can't be Anthony Morelli. I don't make the rules.
That's a deep cut, Tom. I'm sure everybody understood that reference. Good job. I think there's so many names on that Penn State team alone. Abdul Carter, the linebacker, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, running back. One person I'm looking forward to watching is Northwestern wide receiver Preston Bacon, which is not just a great name, but an incredible kink.
Let's talk more about Anthony Morelli. Please, I'm begging you.
Speaking of kinks, I am looking forward to watching Hudson Card at Purdue and the Graham Harrell offense and seeing what he can do. A dual threat guy, can run and can pass, and I think could probably put up some big numbers and can be the difference in some games for Purdue, provided he stays healthy and is consistent. Can even the odds, and I that's always for me been what Purdue can do, is create enough offense to give everybody trouble, but then Ryan Walters, the head coach, coming over from Illinois where he was the defensive coordinator, can they build a defense to go along with it? But also a name, Will Johnson, sophomore cornerback at Michigan, who started about the second half of the season last year and is going to be really, really good. It was pretty good last year. I'm interested to see his development. Won't be surprised at all if he's an all Big Ten player. And lastly, for me, Tom, just because he left Ohio State, it doesn't mean I'm off the Caleb Brown hype train. I just said I will be watching him in that Iowa offense.
Yeah, it's going to be, that's going to be quite a jarring shift in style and surrounding talent and everything else. I mean, the Iowa offense, we'll get to the Iowa offense in a minute.
Yeah.
But, he's someone who I think could have been a player at Ohio State and could have been, a player who made it, had a significant role in the coming years, but didn't want to wait and moved on to Iowa. And I'm sure will have a bigger role at Iowa than he would have had at Ohio State this year. But yeah, he's interesting. He's someone I think we both found pretty intriguing as a player when he was at Ohio State. So that's a good answer as well.
And then the last topic here, what non-Buckeye Big Ten situation are you most looking forward to following this year?
I have two answers. They're both in the Big Ten West, and they are potentially very, very different. They're two teams that are changing their offensive styles or changing their offensive something or other. I'm going to start with Wisconsin because that's probably the more visually pleasing of the two. They brought in Phil Longo from North Carolina. Phil Longo has typically run a very up-tempo offense. This is going to be a very, very big change for Wisconsin. I know they brought in Tanner Mordecai, the SMU transfer, to play quarterback. So, first year under Luke Fickell, I'm sure there's going to be some growing pains. But I think that's going to be, you have in your head what a Wisconsin offense looks like, and that might not be the case for very much longer, that's what a Wisconsin offense looks like. The other one, of course, Tony, Operation 25.5. Can Brian Ferentz save his job? Can the kids, can the Goonies band together and, find the pirate ship and score 25.5 points per game to give Kirk's very special boy another year at his well-deserved job?
I wonder if we may see Iowa going for 2-point conversions more just to get away from that 24-point threshold and hit that 25 just to help. And it won't be enough, or do they go for it every time and maybe get to that 26 when normally would have just been 24? And maybe that way you can steal a couple of points by going for 2 every time. And because you're not going to score 5 times in a game, you got to, those 4 scores that you're going to get, you might want to make the most of them and go for 2. I think that's going to be, I don't want to say fascinating, interesting, especially now with Cade McNamara. We know that the player to be named later in the trade for Jake Rudock way back in 2015. Finally, we can close the deal on that one. I have Wisconsin was my number 1 as well. As I mentioned, also, I want to see what Ryan Walters' defense can do at Purdue. I'm not expecting much in 1 year, although it should be better. I'm also interested in just seeing Penn State's offense, because you talk about your 5-star quarterback, the outstanding running game. They've got a top 5 draft pick at left tackle. They've got some pieces there. Let's do something with it. Let's, can it be the 1994 Penn State offense? Probably not. What kind of receivers do you have? But I think it should be more explosive and not necessarily reliant on the quarterback run as much as they have under Sean Clifford and everybody else before him. So I'll be interested to see that. JJ McCarthy's development. Can they trust him more than they did last year? Can they become a more explosive and more free-flowing passing offense? We will see. And also Matt Rule at Nebraska. Just what's going to happen there? Can they win some games that Scott Frost couldn't? And that I'm talking about all these 1-score losses. Can they make half of those wins this year? Can they be in games that are decided by a 1-score this year? I think that would be maybe that's a first step there.
Yeah, Nebraska is interesting to me. I think Nebraska is much more interesting on about a 2 to 3 year time horizon, because I think there's going to be a little bit of upgrading the talent and getting systems installed and all that kind of stuff, where you're not going to see an immediate just explosion. But I think 3 years from now, that's maybe a 7-8 win team, which it has not been for quite a while. So that would be good news for Nebraska. I didn't put Michigan, and Michigan has some really interesting players, Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum and JJ McCarthy. I find it almost impossible to be interested in Michigan for the first 3 quarters of their season this year. I'm just going to read through their schedule, and you stop me when you think there's a game that's even remotely intriguing. East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, Rutgers, at Nebraska, at Minnesota, Indiana, at Michigan State, off week, Halloween, okay, now we're in November, Purdue, no, okay, last 3 weeks at Penn State, at Maryland, Ohio State. I mean, Michigan's going to be you can just put Michigan in the polls right now at 9-0. It's amazing how bad their schedule is this year. They had kind of the same thing last year. And, this is a 2-year gap because they canceled their series with UCLA, and they play Texas next year. So this is not, forever. This is going to be a terrible non-conference schedule. But man, there is not one interesting game on that schedule until November 11th.
No, and you're trying to imagine, Minnesota, that's for Paul Bunyan, whatever, and the jug, thank you, Paul Bunyan's jug, as we all know.
The old oaken jug, Tony, please.
You're trying to pretty up some games that probably aren't that pretty, but Michigan has tripped up on the road and other places, including East Lansing. But this is going to be a bad Michigan State team, so I don't know if we'll get there. But that will do it, Tom. Anything else?
All right, Tony, we're going to play a game. Paul Warfield versus Donovan Peoples-Jones. Paul Warfield, career receptions, yards, touchdowns, versus the best year of Donovan Peoples-Jones, Michigan career, 2018. Receptions, Tony. Paul Warfield or Donovan Peoples-Jones?
I believe Donovan Peoples-Jones had in the 40s.
He did, correct. Yardage, Paul Warfield or Donovan Peoples-Jones?
Donovan Peoples-Jones famously never had a 100-yard receiving game in his college career, but I believe he was in the 700s, so I will say Donovan Peoples-Jones, or in the 600s. 600s,
yes, he was, yes. So Donovan Peoples-Jones has him there, but touchdowns, Tony, what about touchdowns?
Well, we know that Paul Warfield had 6 career touchdown catches. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones had to have had at least 7.
He had 8. So yes, so there's your Paul Warfield context. Donovan Peoples-Jones, widely considered one of the biggest busts at the college level in recent memory in terms of 5-star who never really put it together on the field. Not necessarily entirely through his own fault. There may have been some supporting cast issues there. That's neither here nor there. But yes, even Donovan Peoples-Jones, best unimpressive season at Michigan, better than Paul Warfield's career numbers.
There you go. Thank you for not only defending me, Tom, but giving me 3 questions that I got correct.
I had to work hard for it. I'm like, okay, Jackson Smith-Njigba versus Paul Warfield. I think you can do this one, buddy. I believe in you.
The Jackson Smith-Njigba's Rose Bowl against Paul Warfield's career. But that will do it. I want to thank you all for joining us as always. Please find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Say hello to us there on message board. Check out all the insane recruiting stuff going on right now if you're into that. And why shouldn't you be? Also, you can find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Go ahead and like this video if you're watching it. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up. And if you're listening to it on a podcast and it's a platform that you can rate and review us, give us a 5-star rate and review. We would appreciate that as well. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.